Hi, everybody. This is a recording to take the place of our normal Zoom meeting. This is the beginning of week 9. And this week you will be taking your lecture exam number 2 during our normal class meeting time. So I wanted to make sure that everybody understood what you should be working on this week. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is share the screen. And let's go ahead and take a look at the module that I put together for you. So I know you guys have been working really hard, so I tried to take it a little easier on you this week, given that you have just, hopefully by the time you're watching this, completed your second exam. So this week for lecture materials, I've only assigned you one chapter, and this is the lymphatic system, which isn't a terribly complicated system. So here's the video for that and the PowerPoint. In lab this week, this is our second week working on human muscles. And so I've got 3 PowerPoints for you that I'm going to present in a moment, looking at muscles of the torso, muscles that move the scapula across the shoulder joint, and muscles that move the humerus across the shoulder joint. Okay, and then you're going to have a lab quiz covering just those muscles, and a lecture quiz covering the lymphatic system. And of course, I will post your lecture exam. And then for interactives, we just have one this week. I haven't double checked that it exactly aligns with the muscles I've assigned you. So please just focus on the muscles that are covered here. There's then a review, and then there's also the homework. Okay. So that'll take care of that. Now let's go ahead and take a look at those PowerPoints. Okay, and we'll start with the muscles that move the torso. Okay, at the beginning of each of these, it reviews the types of actions that you should consider for these muscles. So after watching your videos, which were really good on the muscles, there are a few things that I want to point out to make sure everybody understands. If an action is considered a flexion, then you are decreasing the angle between the 2 points. So we've got one line here, and we have one line here, okay? And so when you are flexing the body, this angle here will decrease. When you extend the body, the angle formed between your torso and your leg will increase. And if you go past standing upright, that is considered hyperextension. Okay, some of you were showing in your videos that flexion was going this way. So if you move the body to the left or to the right, it is a type of flexion called lateral flexion, right? And then of course a twist, everybody had that right. That would be just turning your upper body while you hold your lower body still. Okay, so these PowerPoints are showing you models from the lab, and they do include information on insertion and origin, just to help you to visualize where the muscle begins and ends. Will not be tested on origins and insertions, just on the name of the muscle, locating the muscle on a model or an image, and the actions, all of the actions of the muscle. So again, have your list out to make sure that you can follow along with these and that you understand what the actions are. All right, so we have our 4 abdominal muscles. First, we've got our rectus abdominis, the external abdominal oblique, and some people made the mistake of believing that abdominal compression is the same thing as flexion. So they demonstrate like doing sit-ups or things like that. That is not what abdominal compression is. Think of abdominal compression more as just exerting pressure on all your internal organs and holding them in place within the abdominal cavity. So abdominal compression does not involve movement of the skeleton. All right. And then the internal abdominal oblique, and notice the change in the direction of the fibers on the internal versus, we back up a page, the external. So the external abdominal oblique, see how it's going from lateral to medial, okay? But if we go to the internal, it goes the other direction, as you can see here. It's actually going medial to lateral as you move down the body. So each of these layers where they overlap, you're going to have fibers going in different directions. And that creates a very strong outer wall to that entire abdominal cavity. Okay, and last is transversus abdominis. You can see the fiber direction in this model here. It is basically wrapping around the abdominal cavity. You can see it on this model as well. And think of this as kind of like a belt that encircles the abdominal cavity and acts for abdominal compression. So we're not moving the body here. All right. In addition, we're going to consider the two intercostals. And a lot of you chose to cover these on your videos. We have the external intercostals, and they run rib to rib, just as you see shown here. The fiber direction is the exact same direction as the external abdominal oblique. So as you move from superior to inferior, the fibers go from lateral to medial. So one thing that I would like to clear up is that a number of you said that these muscles are for breathing. Well, yes, they are, but I'm asking you to describe the action. On the list, some of these have in parentheses, especially on the first page, the appearance or the emotion or the outcome of moving that muscle. Like when it says that corrugator supercilii adducts the eyebrows, that's the action, but then it has after it the word frown. This is to help you not to take the place of the action though. Please do not use the words in parentheses in place of the actual skeletal action. So in this case, external intercostals, their only action is to elevate the ribs. That means to move in a superior direction. So if you feel on your own rib cage as you inhale, your ribs will lift. Now that lifting action, the elevation of the ribs, does cause air to be pulled in. And we'll talk about that in respiration. But I don't want you to focus on inhalation as the action. I want you to focus on elevation of the ribs as being the action of the external intercostals. Okay, so as you can see on inspiration, that is pulling air in, that is when you use your external intercostals. And so when the ribs are lifted, it makes the area within the thoracic cavity larger. Okay, now expiration, that is expelling air. Now there's two ways we can do it. You can just relax your external intercostals and those ribs will naturally fall, which forces out air. But the only time you're going to use the internal intercostals is when you force out more air than normal. So the type of expiration that requires the internal intercostals is not your normal breathing. It's when you force out more air than normal. So think about blowing out a birthday cake with 50 big candles on it. You can't just go and put it out. You have to really work and push that air out. So if you exhale and continue past normal, you'll feel that your ribs are going in a downward direction. Okay, so that is depression, moving the ribs down. So the internal intercostals depress the costa and are used in forced expiration. But please just think about how those muscles move and what that does to the bones they're attached to. Okay, so you can see different examples here, and I would like you to study those and go over them. Okay, so those 6 muscles are covered in that PowerPoint, and then there are some just nice images for you to review. I'm trying to escape from this. It doesn't want to let me out. But these are all models that we have back in the classroom. Okay. So The next thing that I would like to share with you are the muscles that move the scapula. Okay, so this doesn't follow in order with the list that we have, but it does go over all of the muscles. And I like the way that this is broken up because it allows us to focus on what are these muscles actually going to move? Is it the humerus? Is it the scapula, etc.? Sorry, cat hair. All right. So let's take a look now. All right, again, with the actions, if you take a look at these drawings, there's a number of ways that the scapula can move. Now, to protract and retract. So protraction, okay, is to move in an anterior direction. So that means if you just, it's not a big movement, but if you just sit up straight and pull your scapula tight against the back of your rib cage, that's protraction. Okay, and retraction is to pull in a posterior direction, moving back. So these are really small movements of your scapula. Elevation is to move superior, depression inferior, and then we won't really be focusing much on the rotational aspect of the scapula. Okay, so the first one on the list is the trapezius, and notice that it has more than one action, and make sure you know all of them. So the trapezius is shown here on the right side of this body because this is superficial. These are deep muscles here. So notice two of the actions relate to the scapula, but the third one has to do with the neck. And that's because if you follow this muscle upward to its origin, it actually has an origin on the back of the occipital bone. Okay, so that's how you're going to extend the neck. So with the neck, again, just like with the torso, flexion is moving the chin down to the chest. Extension is going back to an upright posture. Moving your head backward like this is hyperextension. Okay, so there is a difference between extension and hyperextension. All right, so that's this portion here that goes up to the occipital bone. And then we're also going to see differences in the orientations of the fibers between those fibers that are running to the midline, okay, and those are the ones that are going to adduct the scapula, move it toward the midline. So again, small movement, but imagine holding an orange between your two shoulder blades. So you're sort of pinching together your scapula. That's adduction. Okay, and then we have elevation. And that is this portion here. So notice the orientation of the fibers changes. So if you go way down here to the thoracic vertebra and you start pulling between the scapula and the midline here, that's going to be to elevate the scapula. Sorry, I didn't say that very well. It's going to be to combat elevation, which is going to go this way. So you're going to pull upward as well as extending the neck. Okay, and then these fibers are all going to be used more really for the adduction. Sorry, not trying to confuse. All right, so we have a number of views here of the trapezius. So you can see that it's superficial, it goes from the thoracic vertebra all the way up to the occipital, and then down to the spine of the scapula. Don't mind that. That was just my dog coughing. Okay, levator scapula, okay, is going to elevate the scapula. And so you can see this is deep to the trapezius. It runs from the scapula upward to the head. Okay, and you can see very nicely here, this shows you exactly where the attachments will be. So we're going from the border all the way up to the transverse processes, those transverse projections of the cervical vertebra. So elevation. Rhomboideus major and minor are these two muscles right here. And again, just like with the zygomaticus muscles, how we took two and put them together, we're going to do the same thing here with the rhomboideus muscles, sometimes just called the rhomboid muscles. We have a smaller one that's minor and a bigger one that's major, but the direction is pretty much the same. And you can see that these will adduct the scapula. Again, squeeze those two shoulder blades together to hold an orange between them. Serratus anterior. Okay, you can see here in a dissected version where few muscles are visible that you have these almost tongue-like extensions of this muscle that attach to the various costa. And you can see it here, it will sort of interlace. It looks kind of like interlocking fingers. And that is the external abdominal oblique. So this is going to protract the scapula, bringing the scapula in an anterior direction. So holding the scapula tight against your ribs or costa. Then the pectoralis minor, we can see here, it's actually deep to pectoralis major, which many of you did. Only a few people picked pectoralis minor for the video. And here you could see without any other visible muscles, how this muscle goes from the ribs to the coracoid process of the scapula. And because of that angle, not only will it protract, but also depress. So if you pull your scapula tight and down against the costa, that's pectoralis minor. Okay, and then again, we have additional images. This is just to allow you a chance to review and to practice labeling using these models. Okay, and now the last one is going to be for the humerus. So I've kept this list kind of short this week. I think you guys need a little bit of a rest here. Time to do other things. All right, so these are muscles that attach to the humerus. So the types of actions we're considering are, again, flexion and extension. Now keep in mind that these movements are in the anterior posterior direction. Okay, so you're never going to be showing me flexion like that unless we're talking about lateral flexion. So flexion is going to decrease the angle, extension will increase the angle, and hyperextension will go beyond 180-degree movement. Okay, so abduction and adduction, remember, are in a medial lateral direction. And that kind of movement is primarily associated with the hip joint and the shoulder joint, although there are other areas of the body you can abduct and adduct. Okay. So let's go down here and take a look at these muscles. First, beginning with pectoralis major. Now, unlike minor, pectoralis major attaches to the humerus. And it is a superficial muscle, very broad, okay? And so you can see its insertion here on the humerus if you remove the overlying deltoid and some of the other more superficial muscles. It has 3 different actions, and a lot of you chose to cover this in the video, but some of you did not fully cover all 3 different actions. Okay, so to flex, okay, if you start from here, remember we're focused on the shoulder joint. So to flex is to decrease the angle. So if you bring your arm downward toward the body, decreasing this angle, that is flexion, okay? Medially rotating means just hold your arm very still and roll it in the socket. Don't make any of the movement about this part of the body. Just focus in on that shoulder joint and just roll the humerus inward. Okay, and then adduction is when you start with the arm away from the body and you decrease that angle. That is to adduct the humerus. Okay, so keep in mind, we're just focusing on a single action at a time. Latissimus dorsi, okay, is quite a broad muscle. You could see it here superficially. So there's your trapezius, there's your deltoid, there's the triceps brachii, and then here's this very large, wide sheet of muscle that's the latissimus dorsi. And notice it too has multiple actions. It extends, okay, so makes this angle bigger, medially rotates, again, rolling the humerus inward, and adducts the arm, brings the arm back to the midline. Okay, so here's several different views of latissimus dorsi. All right, then we have the deltoid. Now the deltoid, you can see from a posterior or a lateral or an anterior view. So it's quite a wide muscle, and it goes from, on the anterior surface, it's going to be here on the clavicle, and then on the posterior surface, the spine and the scapula. So it's basically wrapping right around the shoulder. And even though it has multiple insertions all the way around these surfaces, multiple origins around these surfaces, notice it's got a fairly narrow insertion. And that was the deltoid tuberosity that we saw on the humerus. So we're going to focus on its function of abducting, its action, I should say, of abducting the humerus. So if you lift the arm away, moving the arm away from the midline, that is going to be abduction. Now, getting into some of the deeper muscles, we look at supraspinatus. Supra, again, means above. Spinatus is referring to the spine, which travels across the posterior surface of the scapula. So the supraspinatus sits just above this spine here. Okay, and with this one, yeah, it's a little difficult here, this right image. Let's look down here. But if you notice, it's going from the scapula, this fossa or indentation above the spine, and then crossing the shoulder joint to insert on that greater tubercle of the humerus. So its action, again, is to abduct the arm, just like we saw with the deltoid. Infraspinatus sits in a fossa or an indentation that's just inferior to the spine of the scapula. It too is going to cross over the shoulder joint and insert onto that greater tubercle of the humerus. So very similar insertion, okay? But this functions because of a different angle for lateral arm rotation. So if you take that humerus and roll it outward, okay, that's going to get you lateral arm rotation. Teres minor, okay, is a small rounded cross-section muscle that's going from just sort of inferior to the infraspinatus and has a similar insertion. So it's not too surprising that the action is the same again, lateral arm rotation, rolling it out. Okay, so here with the deltoid removed, you can see this is supraspinatus. This fairly large muscle here, this is the infraspinatus, okay? And then down here, we have the teres minor. So these three are all visible on the surface of the scapula. Then we get to the subscapularis, okay? And you have to really pay attention to where this one is located because we are now looking at the anterior surface of the scapula. All those previous ones were on the posterior surface, so we're back here. But if you go right through all the bones and muscle, like you can see here, you're going to find this on the anterior surface, that smooth surface of the scapula. Okay, and it's going to insert on the other tubercle, that lesser tubercle. And the action is stabilization of the humerus, which isn't a movement, but rather a resistance to movement. And then medial arm rotation, back in, rotating this way. So these ones, as I've mentioned before in lecture, form the rotator cuffs. So we've got supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. And so the reason we pay so much attention to the rotator cuff muscles is because this is a very loose joint. And so the action of these four muscles is really to help maintain that joint because it does have a tendency to move around rather a lot. Okay, and then the last muscle on this slide, I believe on these slides is the teres major, which is right down here if we're looking from the posterior view. So it's a posterior view of a right scapula There's the spine, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor is here, and then teres major is here. But notice that teres major goes kind of underneath and on the inside of the humerus to insert, and this is why it adducts the arm, so moves the arm away from the midline and medially rotates. So it's the sort of thing, if you can imagine pulling your arm back to throw a ball, how you're adducting and medially rotating at the same time. Okay, so this is an image taken from one of our models to help you practice. Okay, so, and further images are here from a variety of different views for you to look at. Make sure that you take a look at that same app we've been using. And there are muscle actions there so you can see the muscles working. And please ask me if you have any questions as you work through the material. Your quiz will cover these muscles. So by the end of this week, we will be about halfway through the list. We are not moving into any of the muscles of the arm that move the elbow. So you're only going about halfway through page 2. Next week, we'll be finishing up the arm and getting into the leg. All right. So I hope everybody has a really good week. And then just make Confer Zoom appointments if you want to talk to me or send me emails. All right, good luck on the lecture test if you haven't taken it yet, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.